My name is Peter Marchant, and I teach a course at Brockport, the literature of the Holocaust, which I've been doing for 12 years. The rubric for this course is, this particular program, is why teach the Holocaust at all? Why bother? And I have guests who are survivors and participants in the survivors' presentations, and that's what we're going to discuss. My guests are Eric and Ellen Arndt and Matthew Whittaker, who teaches 7th and 8th grade English in Midlakes Middle School. I met Ellen Arndt 12 years ago, and she and Eric have been coming to my Holocaust classes ever since. They come every semester, and they're so good I have to ask them to come back again and again, and you will find out. I met Ellen at a symposium at Nazareth on the Nuremberg war trials. We were really asking if they had been of any significance, if they'd done any good. And we got into a discussion because somebody at the back of the room said, all the Germans are the same. They're genetically as they are. That's what they're all Nazi. And Ellen began twitching, and then she got quite angry, and she stood up and said, that is not true. It's not true. That's the language of Hitler. Everybody is the same. You cannot stereotype. We were saved by 60 German Christians who, at the risk of their lives, protected us and hid us. That was the beginning of our acquaintance, and she and Eric came to class, and they've been coming ever since. And their story, every survivor's story is different. And the survivors that we have here are different because actually they were never in a concentration camp. They hid in a factory, living underground from 1943 till liberation in 1945. And you'll hear about that story. And I suppose I'll ask the first question. You went underground after December 1942. You went underground in 1943 when Germany appeared to be losing heavily. It was before Stalingrad, but they were losing heavily on the Russian front, and you were afraid that they were going to round up all the surviving Jews in Berlin, whatever jobs they had, and they would be exterminated. And you tried to persuade your father to do likewise, and he said 999. Let's go from there. Why?
First of all, Stalingrad was already falling. It hadn't fallen yet, but it was on the way out. And I learned about what they finally accomplished then in February of 43, which I didn't know, of course, the date at that time, in November of 42. But I heard through the rumor mill that at the beginning of 43, they will line up all the Jews, as we said, even though they were working as slave laborers, and replace them with Polish people and deport them to wherever, which of course means Auschwitz. And I had good connections there where I was working at the Siemens slave labor. And I believe that the Germans are able to do that, to spite themselves even, because they had experienced workers, but they were Jews and they had to go. And then when of course I told my girlfriend, as it were, at that time, and my sister about my plan to go underground. And then I talked to my father, my parents, but primarily my father, who was the man of the house, as it is custom in Germany, in these wars. And of course he didn't want to do that because how do you want to live? With what? No coupons to eat, no ration cards, no nothing. And well, that was the furthest from my mind then. We will find out how we will live once we start that. But anyway, he was set in his ways and did not want to do that. Until I finally gave him an ultimatum. I said, we know that if we as a family get caught together and deported, once we arrive in Auschwitz, you will go, as the old people, so to say, you will go in the gas chambers and we will be worked to death as a young people. We will not stay together in any event. If you don't want to go underground, I can't make you. But we will go. And that's when he changed his mind and he said, well, okay, he will help. He was a physician. He had made friends with some of his patients from way back, Christian Germans. And that's how the whole thing started. And when he approached those people and everything fell into place.
Your father was a doctor, and he'd served with distinction in the First World War and had the Order of the Iron
Cross, yeah.
First Class. And he believed in German law and order.
Yeah.
Am I right? And he had great trust that common sense and law and order would prevail, and Hitler sooner or later would be finished. He was an optimist.
That's right. He was an optimist, but unrealistically thinking, because at that time we would have been killed before Hitler was done with his laws, and that I couldn't. I didn't want to do. I rather would take a chance, you know.
So it was really unthinkable what was happening at Auschwitz.
Sure.
A lot of people thought, oh, you hear these stories, you know, Elie Wiesel's family, they were warned, this is what's happening to the Jews. Yeah. And people couldn't or wouldn't believe it. Why would the Germans do away with skilled workers when they needed them so? Why did they?
That is, I hate to say it, but Nazi stupidity. Really stupid thinking on the part of the Nazis. We have to get rid of the Jews regardless what, because we will win the war anyway. Of course he didn't.
So your father was persuaded to go underground.
Right.
But didn't he have doubts about the responsibility to the factory owner of keeping 6 Jews hidden?
Well, the factory owner only was hiding me in the beginning.
Yes.
During the last half year of the war, there were 6 of us at the factory together because the other 5 didn't have anywhere to go anymore. And every time somebody lost their hiding place completely, I would ask Mr. Köhler, as his name was, I have, my girlfriend has no place to stay. Why don't you bring her in here? She can stay with you. Her mother can stay, and so on and so forth. And he said always the same thing. If I hide 1 Jew or I hide 2 or 3 or 4, makes no difference. They'll kill me if they find me. But in the meanwhile, it was 2.5 years. But the last half year, we were all together in the factory, except my father, who was in the same place the entire time. But in the meanwhile, they were all over the place, outside Berlin, inside Berlin, various places, 1 night, 6 nights, whatever they could find. I was lucky, I stayed the entire time, except in the beginning, in the factory.
You were shaking your head at the idea, when Eric said we must go underground. You agreed at once?
Yeah, because I had really no interest in being killed, least of all by them. And the other thing is that, as you said, how could you think that he would be responsible for 6? You forget something. You forget we did not know the length of time, neither did anyone else. We thought it would be over in 6 months. And the good man, Mr. Köhler, had no idea that he would end up with 6. He had 1. The rest happened gradually, and that is not planned. And therefore you can say, did father worry if the man could do that? Nobody knew if we could do or if they could do what we did. This is not like planning to go for 4 years to Brockport. No. So it's wrong.
How young were you when you went into hiding?
19.
19, that's right. To what extent did your youth, your vitality, help you survive?
A lot.
Oh,
Because
yeah.
our parents had lost everything. We basically didn't. We did not have anything yet. We didn't have households. We didn't have children. We didn't have to really, all these trappings of what a normal life is, and they lost it all, and we didn't. They suffered much more than us, the circumstance of living this way, and it's also much harder when you are older.
Besides that, we grew up doing, when Hitler came to power, we were 10 years old. So the next 9 years, if you will, we started to hate the Nazis more and more and more.
Did.
And we consciously or subconsciously, the laws which they came up with, we dismissed as completely idiotic. And in other words, we had complete contempt for that regime. But you can only do that, I think, if you're young.
It seems like that. In your book, I remember a picture of you and some of your friends on a beach, and I think it said something underneath it in the caption, something along the lines that you were not supposed to be on the beach.
Right.
Of course not.
And
None of them were.
Right.
But that was before underground. That's why that was during the time of slave labor, since we worked at night. The days were free. And of course, that was also before we had a star. We went to the beach, and once we had the star, many of them couldn't do it. I wore mine, what I would call intermittently, and I went wherever I wanted to go. But that I could do because I was not brought up in Berlin. The 2 years that we lived in Berlin, hoping to get out of Germany, were in a totally different part of town. So I had in the part where we were hiding, I had very little worries. Unlike Eric, the factory, this loft, machine shop, really not a factory, a machine shop, was in the same street where they had lived. So that makes it a little harder to hide. For me, it was no great big deal. So, and I always try to tell the students when I go to school that going underground does not just mean that you don't have a home. There is a war. People can only eat from ration stamps that the government gives them. If you disappear, you do not have those. And if you do not eat, you will also die. So it becomes a whole much more difficult and, existence. And the good thing is that one doesn't know that ahead of time, and nobody knew that it would take so terribly long. First we thought after Stalingrad 6 months, and then we thought after the invasion maybe a month, and it went on forever. At least for us it seemed forever.
Eric, you said that you knew what was happening at Auschwitz, and that was from 1942 on.
Mm-hmm.
How?
Well, there were several, some people, believe it or not, escaped, some Jews, from Auschwitz, and came back and they spread the stories, of course. Some soldiers, German soldiers, came back and said what they had seen, not only in Auschwitz, and other camps too. And the people who were deported never wrote back. My extended family, and Ellen's father for that matter, nobody wrote. So what I mean, you can make your own picture, you know.
Well, you knew about the gas chambers and
No.
the crematoria?
No details. At that time, I didn't know any details. I only knew that they were
Killing everybody.
killed.
How
People
and
were
what
killed.
we didn't know.
But that was a fact. You know.
And the rumor mill that Germany was losing on the Russian front and there was the siege of Stalingrad. Where did people get their hard news from?
BBC.
From the BBC.
At night
On your
under a
crystal
blanket.
set?
No, that I put it on the from regular radio, very quietly. Look, if you were found out being German, let's say, a German Christian, and you were found out to listen to the BBC, you were done for. To us, first of all, we didn't want to be caught anyway. It didn't matter what we did. So listen to the BBC was the least of the things, you know, we were worried about. Very quietly, and we got the information.
Except that one has to add that we didn't have radios, because all Jews had to give up long before that.
Oh yeah,
Radios, cameras, bicycles, pets.
Well,
Not that that was of any value to the Third Reich. It was just to hurt, you know, the people who had these things. Furs, all that you had to give in. But of course, once we went underground, we had access to radios, you know, of the people where we were. And you put it on very quiet, and you put a blanket over the whole thing, including your head, and you got the news.
I never turned in my bicycles.
No.
As I always say.
Well, just let me go on about your crystal set. Explain.
Well, a crystal set is a crystal set. You use a crystal and a brush, metal little thing, which you hit the crystal with, and you can make. I'm not going to go into details. Anyway, you have a little radio with earphones only, not on a loudspeaker. But I also made a certain thing there. I forgot. I wouldn't know the name anymore. What it's all called. So that when I had 3 stations on it. When I put a station on, with a regular crystal set, you would always lose a station, nothing. So with this, I didn't lose a station with that little thing I put in between, and used the crystal only to make it a little louder for my ears. So I could hear the army, what you call it?
Army broadcast.
Army broadcasting, the German army. I could hear another, forgot now, one other station from Berlin, I guess. I can't remember the other one anymore, outside Berlin. Anyway, the main thing was the army station. And they would report when bombers would come into Germany, and Germany was on a map, was put into quadrants, little quadrants with names on it. And if the bombers would come a certain way, I noticed that's when they come to Berlin. So I knew about, I had about 25 minutes warning. We were ready when the bombs came, before the air raid sirens went on. And that later on, after the people in the house knew I was there nights and days and night, because I was such a good German, manufacturing secret stuff for the Wehrmacht. When I told them, okay, I will let you know 15, 20 minutes before the siren goes, I had a cowbell, and I would open the window and rang the cowbell, and all the people who lived in the tenements next to it would get ready into but they were in the bunker, not bunker, in the cellar.
Air shelter.
Air raid shelter, by the time the siren would go. So they were very appreciative of what I did and other things I did. And they were going to make me the air raid warden. Well, that of course I could not accept. So I told them, no, you have a good man here. He was a jerk, by the way. But they made him that Eric warden, so that was good for me because I told them then what to do. So that's a story about the crystal set.
Eric was able to do some of what he did, obviously his great technical skill. I couldn't construct a crystal set for toffee if my life depended on it. He was also helped by a leather coat, his father's leather coat from the First World War. Tell.
Well, my father he was in the cavalry and had a short leather coat, army coat, which I used when I had my first job after I got thrown out of school being Jewish. I took a job as a bicycle messenger in the winter time, snow too, not just cold. And I wore that leather coat because it was warm. My father bought me officer boots against the snow and breeches, you know, the riding pants, which I wore with a leather coat and all that. I had a cap, which was an officer cap without stuff on it, of course. And later on, I had a steel helmet too, during the war. So before I dared to go, before the people knew in the tenements that I was their knights, I didn't go into the air shelter. But my wife and her mother already were with me in the factory. They would go to a public shelter at the other end of the block, and I would stay upstairs in the factory, but dressed just in case something comes down close by. I would dress like I just explained to run out. So one time there was an air raid, and when it was all over, sirens sounded all clear. They didn't come back. So of course I got worried. They were looking for women too. So finally I figured, no, I have to go over there. It was at night, dark. But you know how it's dark, but you can see. It's not pitch dark. So when I got to the bunker there, that public one, was a guard in front. And I asked him, how come that the people are not coming out? Oh, and he was leisurely, was a private or something, I don't know, leisurely standing there and said to me, oh, I didn't get any order to evacuate yet. So I don't know how I managed it, but I shouted at him, what kind of army does he think he is in? You stand at attention talking to an officer, which he immediately did. I went inside and gave the order, everybody out. Waited until my wife and her mother came by. They didn't acknowledge my presence. They knew better. And I waited until most everybody was out. Then I went outside, and the guy, when he saw me, stood at attention again, I guess. I went to him and told him to stand at ease, and it disappeared. All that leather coat and the boots.
And you had those all through until liberation?
No. Yeah, until liberation.
Yes.
Yeah.
Well, clothes were very important. Ellen, tell the story about your mother and her hat and her fox fur and what she got up to with it.
Well, you know, when I told my mother that we were going and hide, she was agreeable because she knew there was nothing to lose, right? And I said, well, we have to just pack a little bit. And, you know, some friends of ours kept some stuff. And my mother packed. So I go and I look and I said, Mother, what are you packing? This is ridiculous. She packed 2 huge silver foxes. She was small, even smaller than me. Those things were hanging to the floor. She that and a silk dress and a hat. This hat needs to be described. It was like the Tower of Babel, with a chicken on top, feathered, and then veiling hanging down. And you can't get, she said, yes, I can get dressed like that. She says, because when I'm dressed like that, nobody will think I'm hiding. And yeah, that made sense, right? So my mother packed this, but to me, totally useless stuff, and went into hiding. And it came in handy.
Tell them about the Gestapo party.
Well, there she wasn't wearing that because it was wintertime. Sometimes when we had no place to stay, being in the street is very dangerous because men are in the army and women are supposed to be working, so you better don't hang around any place. So we used the subway. A German subway was always very nicely heated and clean. But you can't ride the subway all day long because they have controls. So we would ride from one station to the end and back, but then we'd get out. So we got out and it was very cold, snowy, sunny. It was a pretty day, but terribly cold. So what are we going to do now? We couldn't go to the machine shop till the men who worked there had gone home. So while we were standing in this plaza, I happened to see across the plaza there hangs a big banner and it says, the SS Christmas party. So I said to my mother, I said, you know what? We'll go to the SS Christmas party. And my mother looked at me and said, no, you have totally gone nuts. I said, no, because nobody will look for us there. Well, if you remember how my mother felt about the hat and the fur, that made sense to her. So that's where we went, and we said to the two goons who were standing outside, is it open to the public? They said yes. They escorted us in, we sat down. I don't have the faintest idea what went on in there, but they brought little trays with, I think, brandy or something and cookies. So we were totally satisfied. It was warm, it was dark, we went in the street and we had brandy and cookies. And who would look for us at the SS Christmas party? Nobody. So then we got out and we got those two idiots wanted to walk us home. My mother got rid of them. And
how?
Well, she told him that my husband, whom I didn't have, had just come home from the front and was resting at home, and he would not like if other men would walk us home. Well, that even these idiots could understand. So we got rid of them and went back to the machine shop. By that time it was after 5. The workers had left, and we went to our cozy home in the machine shop.
Well, tell the story of your mother going to a good restaurant.
Well, my mother, as I said, you can't just flop around. My mother stayed with a lady that she had never in her life met before, who took her in, was very good to her, and told the neighbors that this was her aunt who was in Berlin for medical treatment. That meant my mother had to leave every day to go to her treatment. So Mom got all dressed with the before-mentioned hat and the furs and whatever. It must have been summer or something. And she noticed, she always went to West Berlin, and she noticed that the restaurants are full of people, mainly officers and stuff. And I think she went in one time and ordered, you know, and said, well, let me have your coupon-free soup. Every restaurant had to have a coupon-free soup, which was some watery potato stuff. And of course, since the restaurants were crowded, and in Europe they would seat you with other people, it so happens that the officer next to her said, Madam, that's not necessary, I have plenty of coupons, and gave her one to eat real food. So my mother then decided this was a pretty good deal, and she went and purposely into a very full restaurant a week later or so, and said to the maître d', oh, you're very crowded, but I see there's a table with only one gentleman. Can I sit there? And the waiter said, oh, sure, and asked the guy, and he said, yes, it was okay. And my mother sat down with her hat and her furs and opened her rather fancy purse and said, I did it again. I've left my ration coupons in the other purse. Just bring me your water soup. And of course, to which the guy immediately replies, that's not necessary. I have more than enough for all of us. And gave her a handful of stamps, and she ordered roasted goose and whatever, and ate and came home and told us about the story and said, but the guy wants to meet with me again. So we were a little leery, but as long as it was in a restaurant, nothing really could happen to her. So she, I think, did it once or twice more, met this guy, some colonel or something, in a restaurant and had a good dinner. And it ended because the good man wanted her to come and see his apartment so he could show her, what was it that one showed?
Etchings or something.
Yeah. My mother did not want to see any etchings, so that was the end of that. And but she ate a few times, you know. And so these fancy clothes had their use. Besides, they really made her look invisible. She looked like a well-off middle-class German lady of about, not 45 or something like that. And nobody ever suspected her in the least.
I would suppose that she was very attractive.
She was nice. She was just, well, there are pictures of her in the book. She was just, you know, she wasn't Marlene Dietrich.
Tell them about the bicycle. German Jews weren't allowed bicycles. You had a bicycle and you used it.
Oh yeah, I had two bicycles. I had a racing bicycle, which I had used in races and before. And I had a touring bike, which I used to go shopping with or to work or whatever. Since when I was there day and night already, but on my own, it wasn't bad in the summertime. If it rained, I just would take a coat, my coat or whatever, or what do you call that thing?
Poncho.
Poncho, you know, for the bike. Put water on it, hang it up. So when the people came in, they see my poncho, wet poncho hanging there, and that's of course completely normal. If it rains outside, it has to be wet. But then winter came and snow. Now I had the bike in the cellar coming from the street. You had to go through the tenement building first into the yard. To the left there was an entrance to our storage cellar from the factory. That's where my bike was stored away. So I would have to come down now the stairs from the factory, go through the snow into the cellar, and then out to the street. But I had to go backwards through the yard so that my footprints would point in the right direction. Took my bike out, carted it to the street. There I would drive a little bit, come back in, put that thing back into the cellar, and then go in my footsteps the proper way to the stairway where I go upstairs. So you could not make a mistake. Somebody would have noticed, gee, Eric is here already, or as I was called, Walter, is here already, but the footprints go the other way. You couldn't make mistakes like that. You know.
It seems to me remarkable that nobody turned you in, that the people who were befriending you kept the story to themselves and protected you for 2 years. Didn't they help with food?
Yes, as far as they were able.
They left food for you on the stairs?
Those people did not let us know that they had recognized us. We did not know who left a cabbage on the stairs till after the war, when they said that they had recognized Eric and therefore they were doing this. But during the time we had no idea why there sometimes was a cabbage or a rutabaga sitting on the steps. No idea.
Were you frightened?
No.
Because you were young and in love?
No. I think
Because you were young?
Yes, because I was young and because, as Eric said, we considered them so stupid that it was remarkable that they could put their shoes on. Therefore, you know,
No, but
obviously, a government that says Jews can be recognized by their left ear, and therefore for all pictures, for, you know, ID cards and stuff, the left ear had to be this way, and you had to sit this way so it could be photographed. Any government that come out with a guideline like that, what would you think of it?
No, but we were not afraid.
There were times we were afraid,
yeah,
but not in general. No, we did not. You run around afraid you're being caught the next day. You got to give that up.
Well, when were you afraid?
Incidents.
No, in certain, not so much with that, but let's say the air raid. The bombs came down all around you. Well, you were not, I can't say afraid in the sense of that you cowered there. No, no. It came to your mind. Well, you could get killed. But that was about it. That's as far as it would go, you know. Otherwise, no, I knew, and I think we all knew, we will make it, and that's it.
They will disappear.
But we lived from, not only from day to day, from hour to hour, really, you know.
But you were extraordinarily optimistic.
Yeah.
You had a sense you were going to make it.
Yeah.
But your mother and your father, they weren't so young and optimistic.
No. We did not ask them what they thought. We didn't have time for that kind of stuff. Everybody had to deal with it the best they could.
You know that my father, after he arranged the beginning, told me, okay, I arranged it, but you take over from now.
Eric, while you were underground, how much did you think of your love? How much did you think of her while you guys were separated a lot? I mean, were you guys together? Were you boyfriend, girlfriend then, or you were not married yet, right?
No, we couldn't get married.
Right.
But my wife, she was accepted as my wife by my parents.
Okay.
And I was accepted by her mother, you know. So, no, you couldn't get married. How can you do that?
Right.
Yeah.
And other than that, we were much too busy staying alive to have any high-flying, writing each other poems or something.
No.
You know?
Right.
Besides, that's in our style anyhow.
Well, on birthdays, did you exchange presents, or did you write, or?
I sometimes I made something. For instance, I made for my mother-in-law a little funnel from silver, not silver. It's an alloy, little sheet metal, and a brass tube, which she used until she died.
Yeah, to transfer perfume into the little bottle that she carried in her pocketbook.
So then I can't remember. We had nothing, of course.
No, we didn't.
But you did earn money
in
the factory.
Oh, yeah.
You had some German marks.
Oh, sure.
Money was
but that had to do for all of you. Nobody else was earning money.
No. But But Ellen, she and my sister worked here and there and got paid too, little, not much. I got a regular journeyman's pay in the factory, which was roughly, I can't remember, 60-some-odd marks a week, which was normal. You couldn't make a living with it, you know, except we couldn't buy anything.
No, we had no ration stamps. We couldn't buy anything.
In the black market,
buy socks. You couldn't buy socks. You couldn't buy shirts. Everything needed coupons, right? You couldn't buy food. Everything needed coupons. So money was really, unless you wanted to go to the black market, which we didn't.
It was too dangerous.
Much too dangerous. They raided the black market area every weekend. They always caught people who just got too hungry and went. But we had talked about that before we went, and we said, under no circumstance are we ever going to the black market. So we didn't. We preferred staying hungry and alive and not buying 2 pounds of carrots and be dead, you know. So
how did you manage with food?
We somehow didn't. But
no, wait a minute. The question should be, how did you manage without food?
Right, you phrased it wrong.
Yeah. Well, we did, but of course the war couldn't have lasted much longer.
No.
I was down to just 100 pounds, and the women were even thinner than that.
A couple of more, and I almost had nothing to cook outside of the not yet mentioned grains.
Tell them
they
that
were coming to an end, and there was nothing else to be had. If it had lasted, let's say, 2 months longer, we would have died. But it didn't. It ended.
you make it sound something of a lark, as if sometimes it was funny and you had high spirits, but much of the time it couldn't have been very funny. It must have
wasn't
been
funny.
Oh, it wasn't at all.
We just afterwards thought that when we talked about the incidents with my sister-in-law, my brother-in-law, we said, my God, that was really funny. I don't think we thought it was funny when we did it.
No, it's very hard to explain. It's a long time, 2.5 years, without having a home, without having food. You know, it's a long time.
Nothing
and
normal.
You can't explain how you made it, really.
Because you don't know.
You live, as I said, from hour to hour, you know.
Yeah. So we never left the machine shop without carrying a spoon, because maybe someplace we might find something to eat.
But you had the sense that the war was coming to an end.
Oh, yeah.
Germany was losing the war.
Sure.
The air raids were more and more frequent. You had the crystal set, so you picked up the BBC?
Well, that on the regular,
You can't do that on that set.
was in the factory was a regular.
They had a radio.
The BBC, of course, gave also the troop positions and what have you, you know.
Yeah.
How did you make it last? I think it was 60 years a few days.
60 years.
It'll be 60 years next month.
And when I was going to ask, the reason why I asked that question was when you came in, I was very, very intrigued by your, I want to say, your connection, your ability to tell the stories with sort of a light heart, even though you survived, you know, what you survived. So I thought, you know, what is their advice? And
well, we have an advantage as far as longevity is concerned of our marriage. Our background. I can't think of having married somebody else, and I don't think Ellen could have.
I'm going to try it.
That time that we spent together in the underground.
Because nobody else would know how we feel about certain things.
do you remember the advice that you gave me?
Yeah.
You do?
Yeah, let your wife start the conversation and also end it.
I want to bring up one thing. Time is coming to an end. Just tell them quickly about the way you used your bicycle with the Breadline.
Oh,
but that's post-war.
Yes.
That has nothing
after
to do with
liberation.
After the
There was
war.
a bread ration. Yeah.
We had, by that time, we had identification cards that we were victims of fascism. And with that identification card, you could go into a store. If there was a line, you could go ahead of the line. So I came home with my bike from work, I guess, and Ellen was crying, was downstairs, right? And I said, what happened? Well, there was a line on the bakery, which was across the street from where we lived then after the war. And the women wouldn't let her in. So I said, well, don't worry about it. I took my bike, went back, somewhat back, made a good speed, came up to speed, jumped the curb, and then mowed down the entire line of women, which you don't do, except you have to put that into still the wartime. So you get really, you hate, period. No more, we don't hate anymore.
It's a story of extraordinary courage, and I do not know how they found the guts to do what they did.
Neither do we.
This story is in this delightful book, Survival in the Shadows, which is very well worth reading. And you'll hear more of Ellen, and I mean, you'll read more of Eric and Ellen Arndt's stories. So thank you very much, Matthew. Thank you very much for being here with me.